Hello, everyone, and welcome to American Thought Leaders Now, our spin-off series of the original American Thought Leaders program. Today, our very, very special guest is Emily Schrader, who is currently in Israel and reporting on the situation. Emily, so good to have you.
Thank you so much for having me.
Emily, let's just start with a picture of what happened, right? Like right from the beginning, I was up for whatever reason in the middle of the night on Saturday night here, and this is where I started getting, intel from what was going. Why don't we just start right at the beginning? What happened?
So at 6 a.m., about 6:30 a.m., Hamas, the terrorist organization which controls the Gaza Strip, launched a full-scale invasion of southern Israel. And they did that by firing thousands of rockets at the same time, while simultaneously crossing the border en masse, hundreds of terrorists. But we don't know how many total there were, other than it was a very, very large presence. It was clear this was a coordinated campaign in advance, and this assault of rockets and terrorists entering different Israeli small towns, mostly on the Gaza border, continued for several hours. I think it was 9 or 10 a.m. This is when I woke up to rocket alarms, to the sirens being sounded in Tel Aviv. I'm in South Tel Aviv, so I get all of the rocket sirens from Rishon LeZion and the areas that are just to the south of Tel Aviv, though not considered southern Israel. At first, I just thought it would be like another wave of, fighting for a couple of days, as we have seen occur a couple of times. But then when I realized what was happening in almost all of the communities on the Gaza border, I realized this was something much, much more severe. And within hours, Israel formally declared that they were in a state of war.
Emily, why don't we just do a brief bit on what the geography of all this looks like, actually? So, of course, Gaza is towards the south of Israel. If you can just explain that, and we'll do some graphics alongside.
Sure. So Gaza is a coastal enclave that is ruled by the Palestinian terrorist organization Hamas. They are funded and supported by the Islamic Republic of Iran, and they have carried out terrorist operations against Israeli civilians and actually also in some cases foreigners for many, many years now since they took control. They're actually a political rival of the Palestinian Authority, which is the main leadership of the Palestinian people, which they sit in the West Bank. But Hamas has almost entire control over the Gaza Strip, which is part of the problem. So this area, this small area, is extremely densely packed. It has about 2 million people altogether. The population skews very young because they have many children. And there is what's called the Gaza envelope, a collection of Israeli communities, not settlements. It's not any sort of disputed territory. There's no controversy over this area. But the area surrounding that has many different, they're called kibbutzim. They're like small little communities that have, a few hundred people usually, or even less in some cases, in that area, within anywhere from 4, even less, I think, like 2 kilometers to, and up. The Gaza envelope would include Sderot. That would be the furthest inland, I believe, that you would consider the Gaza envelope. But these communities have been under almost constant rocket fire since 2005, when Israel withdrew from the Gaza Strip. Israel used to actually have communities, Jewish communities in the Gaza Strip itself, and we tore up those communities because we thought that it would bring peace. So the Israeli leaders decided to give back that territory to the control of the Palestinian people, despite the fact that, historically speaking, it actually never was Palestine or a Palestinian state, because such a state didn't actually exist. It was a part of Egypt prior to that. But nonetheless, because we wanted peace with our neighbors, that was the logic behind the decision. What we got in return was now 25,000 rockets and counting. The majority of those have been hits on the southern communities that we're mentioning now. And those same communities are actually the territories that are being heavily bombarded still with rockets right now, but also with the invasion, the infiltration of Palestinian terrorists. So the majority of the fighting on the ground right now is occurring in that area. Now, to the north of Israel, we also face a challenge because of Hezbollah, another Iran-backed terrorist organization. And we have seen yesterday and today that there were rockets being fired from Lebanon, from Syria, primarily Lebanon, into Israeli territory. There were also a couple of them yesterday. It hasn't been a major escalation, but just a few hours ago, we did get reports that there was some sort of infiltration, and residents were advised to stay in their homes and potentially stay in the bomb shelters. We don't know what the scale is of it yet, though.
I definitely want to talk about that threat from the north, from Hezbollah. Before we go there, why don't you tell me why you call this an invasion, and how the actual physical manifestation of it? I also want to talk about the intelligence realities as well.
I know that right now the army and the government are focused on ensuring that the Palestinian terrorists who did infiltrate are caught and are sent back to Gaza, or otherwise apprehended. I don't think that the last report that I saw, we have not captured all of them. There are still several communities in southern Israel on the Gaza border that still have Hamas terrorists hiding. And as a result of not knowing exactly how many of them infiltrated either, we can't know that all of them have been captured. They could have gone in a group of 2 or 3 people to Tel Aviv. They could go to Jerusalem. We just don't know. We don't have enough information. Now, as to how this happened, again, we don't know. There are theories that there was a cyber attack by Iran on the army's infrastructure. There's also a theory that there was someone within the army who betrayed. It could be both, could be neither. We just don't know at this point. The army has stated that they're going to do an investigation, but as I stated before, right now they're focused on ensuring that all of the deceased are identified, the families are notified, and of course the number one priority is the hostages that these terrorist organizations took a little over, as far as we know so far, a little over 100 hostages into the Gaza Strip, and they are there now. And what's especially egregious about this is that it wasn't like they took soldiers as some sort of, what they perceive as being a legitimate military operation. No, they took grandmothers, they took children, they took babies, they took women away from their children in some cases. There have also been reports, a lot of testimonies are coming out today after the people who survived are recovering or have been rescued in some cases. So some of these stories are just horrific. I mean, things that you would think would have been from the Holocaust or from ISIS. I mean, that's the level of barbarity that we're speaking about in terms of assault, rape, torture, kidnapping, and murdering people, and murdering parents in front of their children. I mean, just absolutely shocking cruelty. That's what we saw.
Tell me a little bit about, the invasion itself. I understand it from the air, from the land, from the sea, from basically all possible routes.
Yeah, so what we know so far is that the terrorists did infiltrate in 26 different points along that Gaza border fence. Some of it's actually censor, it's not all like a fence. But they did enter at 26 different points so far. Could be more, but that's what we know so far. And they did enter from sea as well, which is like on Zikim Beach, which is like at the border, at the northern border of the Gaza Strip. And they also had people enter across the land border. And they also had people actually parachute in. And there's footage of people at the nearby music festival where they massacred 260 people, as well as kidnapping others in that festival alone. But there's footage from this party where you see Hamas terrorists literally coming in on like parachutes into the festival. I'm sure I wouldn't have even known what to do in that position. I would have thought it was a joke or something because it's so unbelievable. I mean, it sounds like it's something from a movie, but it's not. It's our worst fears and our worst nightmares are actually coming to fruition right now. So it's incredibly upsetting.
I was reading eyewitness accounts in Tablet magazine, a piece by Leah Leibowitz. Absolutely kind of shocking content. Why do you think they targeted that?
Hamas is a terrorist organization, and their goal is to inflict as much horror on the Israeli public, in this case, that they can. So obviously they were looking for a mass casualty incident, and that is what they did. I think that less than targeting a particular music festival, their goal here was to target communities surrounding the Gaza Strip, which they did. But in addition to that, the timing of it, the reason that they chose this day in order to launch a surprise attack was because it was the anniversary of the Yom Kippur War, which was also it was Israel's worst surprise attack in our history. So that was very much intentional. And on top of all of that, it was a Jewish holiday. So I think that all of these factors combined made it an ideal target for the terrorist group. And we know also that Iran gave them the green light. Just the Monday prior, the leaders of Hamas, Hezbollah, and Islamic Jihad met in Beirut. And that was, according to Hamas sources, who signed off on, who gave the green light to conduct this operation. Now, Iran has claimed that they assisted. The full extent of how hasn't yet been revealed.
No, I mean, absolutely shocking. So what, as we speak right now, it's Monday, October 9th. What is the casualty reality?
So the most updated statistics that I saw were well over 700. There is one source that's reporting over 800. So I would say between 700 and 800 is what we're looking at right now. I do expect that to go higher, however. I don't think that the number of hostages will go much higher. I think everyone's pretty much agreeing that it's between 100 and 150. But we won't really know until we have all of the people who are missing. We're able to account, whether we find bodies or we, understand through one way or the other, perhaps through our Egyptian allies, who Hamas actually has.
No, I mean, this has been described by a number of people as kind of pre-civilizational behavior.
Yeah, I would definitely agree with that. And I mean, some of the footage that I've seen, I've never seen anything like it in my life. It's hard for me to believe that it's actually real, because just the sheer barbarity. And I think the thing that really sticks with me is they're happy about the level of cruelty they're inflicting on random people. Not soldiers, not someone in a uniform that approached them, attacked them, that did something to them. They are gleefully murdering people, innocent people. It's shocking. It's really, really shocking to see that level of depravity and inhumanity in another person. I haven't seen anything like it with the exception of a video from ISIS.
One of the responses that I'm seeing through some commentators, even on very prominent, legacy media, is that this is some sort of, and I'm just going to kind of broadly characterize the response, but this is some sort of, reasonable response in reaction to 75 odd years of genocidal activity by Israel against the Palestinian people. That's a broad characterization. How do you respond to that and similar claims?
Well, I think that the Palestinian narrative, they've been very successful at presenting. The problem with it is that it's not true. And in many cases, what they are accusing us of doing are things that they are doing. And we see that through the evidence that they themselves have been putting out with the videos of this latest murderous campaign. But I think if you look, historically speaking, at the numbers of the Arab population, because there was no state of Palestine, there were Arabs who existed here, of course, but as a Arab people, there was no Palestinian people in 48. That's why the war in 1948 was the Israel-Arab War, because the other Arab countries invaded, not the state of Palestine, because there was no state of Palestine. In fact, they turned down the proposal to do that. But speaking of, genocide, if you look at the population statistics for literally every single village, and this is according to the Palestinian Authority statistics. They're not mine. They're not an Israeli source or think tank. They're the Palestinian Authority statistics. For as long as they have data, the population in every single village has increased, in the West Bank and in Gaza, has increased year over year. So you can't claim that Israel is committing a genocide if the population continues to go up. I mean, if that's genocide, then we're the worst genocide committers in the world. So that's not actually a valid argument. Now, you can claim that Israel acts inappropriately. You can claim that the military kills too many civilians, whatever. All of that is legitimate criticism. But when you get into the territory of Israel's committing a genocide or Israel's ethnic cleansing, it doesn't make sense because it's just historically, you can prove all of those claims false based on what the definition of those words are. Now, I've also heard people argue that it's a result of an oppressive occupation. This is also inaccurate because occupation is something that occurred as a result of the 1967 war in which multiple Arab countries invaded Israel, and the territory that belonged to Jordan, not Palestine again, but to Jordan, the West Bank of the Jordan River, that's why it's called West Bank, that was the territory that Israel was able to obtain when they pushed back the Jordanians. Now, after the end of the war, Israel proposed giving back all of that territory to each of the respective countries, but they didn't want it. This is something a lot of people in the West don't realize. Why didn't the Jordanians make a Palestinian state? If they support the Palestinian people, or Egypt had control of Gaza. That's not one, but two opportunities from two different Arab states who've criticized Israel when they had an opportunity of territory they controlled to make some sort of Palestinian state, and they did not do so. So that just speaks to the fact that when we talk about the state of Palestine and its history, there was no state of Palestine. That being said, I don't think that means they shouldn't in the future. That depends on future negotiations, and they clearly self-identify as a people now, whereas they didn't before. But that identity as an Arab people didn't exist until the 1960s. So you can't say that what's happening today is a result of 70 years or even 40 years of occupation. Furthermore, when you have a situation in which terrorist organizations are controlling entire cities and you have a government Palestinian Authority that isn't able to control it, Israel not only has a right, but they have an obligation in order to intervene to protect their civilians. It's not our job to clean up the internal Palestinian society. That's their job. That's part of what was set forth in the Oslo Accords, which technically until today is still valid because there hasn't been any further negotiations or further agreements. Furthermore, based on the activities that the Palestinian terrorists have been documenting themselves, if this was about territory, if this was about the state of Palestine, if this was about occupation, then you would see a strategic military objective to this type of campaign. Not that that would be okay either, but that's not what we're seeing. What we're seeing is them invading cities or small towns of civilians, targeting civilians, shooting up old ladies at bus stops, dragging civilians out of their vehicles with roadblocks that they set up in order to catch civilians and shoot them on the street, capturing dead bodies and living bodies and taking them as hostages. This is not behavior of an entity which wants statehood. This is thuggish terrorist behavior whose only intent is to terrorize the Israeli public. And I don't know, even if you disagree with Israel's politics, everything that they have done is so far beyond the limit of what should be socially or societally acceptable, even in a war.
So what is the stated goal of Hamas in its role? Essentially it plays the role of government in Gaza, right?
Yes. So Hamas, their stated goal is the complete destruction of the state of Israel. That is their founding principle. They're an offshoot of the Muslim Brotherhood. Only in recent years, they have been receiving significant funding, like 70 million plus annually, from the Islamic Republic of Iran. And that is a strategic move on the part of Iran because they are funding multiple terrorist organizations, both Sunni and Shia, on Israel's borders for this purpose, in order to carry out activity like this, and hopefully not a nuclear weapon if we're able to stop that. But that is Iran's intent, and that's Hamas's intent. And I think despite the fact that they are religiously rivals, they're united in their hatred of Jews, and that's what we've seen. They're manifesting it clearly for the whole world to see.
I want to talk a little bit about this funding because there's been kind of the disputed discussion. There was $6 billion that was recently released by the Biden administration, held in I believe Korean banks, that was basically being blocked from Hamas being able to have access. pardon me, Iran from being able to have access to.
Same thing.
And right, but my point is that there's a dispute around the use of that money in this attack and how those would be connected. What are your thoughts on that?
Well, I mean, I think the first thing to remember is that money is fungible. So whether or not the exact dollars that were intended for use from this, release of funds isn't actually relevant, because whatever money they would have had to spend on food or other humanitarian needs, they're not going to now because they spent it on terrorist operations instead. So that is the logic of the argument. No, the money from the exact $6 million that's being held in the banks in Qatar, that was sent from Korea to Qatar, might not have been used in this attack, but money that would have been used elsewhere is going to be made up for by that $6 billion. Now, the first problem, there's many problems. The first problem with this, the release of $6 billion, is that it's going through Qatar. And we're talking about a government which bribed their way to the World Cup, allowed foreign workers to be, have completely inhumane slavery-like conditions while building the World Cup. They just praised the actions of Hamas in in this terrorist attack. So this is not and also a government that's given a lot of cover to terrorists and terrorist organizations in the past. Qatar, unlike some of the other countries like Iran, kind of plays both sides. They have a friendly relationship with the West, even the United States, which is part of the reason they were chosen to funnel, to be the pathway to funnel that money. But at the same time, they are an Islamist, at least protecting country. And there's no reason to believe whatsoever that they're going to ensure that money is spent on humanitarian purposes anyway. Even if they could, as I said, money is fungible and it doesn't actually matter. If the Islamic Republic is getting $6 billion additional dollars, then $6 billion additional dollars is freed up elsewhere.
I want to talk a little bit about this. You mentioned Qatar, you mentioned Iran, you mentioned the Muslim Brotherhood, which of course there's a connection to Egypt. And I can't help but think about, Saudi and, there was this promise that the Abraham Accords might normalize relations between Israel and Saudi Arabia. I had actually, the night that this all happened, I'm talking about here in Washington, D.C. time, I had actually been in a place where some of those initial discussions were had about the Abraham Accords, horribly ironically. It seems to me like that promise is maybe dead now. And also, there seems to be this kind of requirement almost that the other Islamic states kind of validate what Hamas has done. That's my observation, but I want to hear your thoughts on it.
Saudi Arabia did issue some sort of statement, basically casting the blame on Israel, which, as I explained earlier, is patently absurd. But kind of like Qatar, Saudi Arabia plays both sides very well. They have a great relationship with the West, and they also have a great relationship, obviously, with the Islamic world. And I don't think that even with this horrific event that has happened in Israel, or events that have happened in Israel, I don't think that means peace with Saudi is out of the question. I think a big motivating factor in this campaign, in the eyes of the Islamic Republic, is that they don't want peace between Saudi Arabia and Israel. And I think that they felt motivated to invest more resources, or whatever they did invest, in carrying out this terrorist activity. Saudi Arabia, just a few months prior to the discussion of peace with Israel, made a normalization agreement with Iran as well. And already we see that that's falling apart with multiple different political arguments, whether it be over a football game or a press conference where they didn't want a photo of Soleimani. That relationship is not going to last. It never was. I think it was a strategic play on Saudi Arabia's part, because they are ultimately going to make peace with Israel. And they didn't want to be in a situation in which Iran is going to retaliate in a stronger way with what they're doing in Yemen. That is my take on the situation.
Oh, absolutely fascinating. Well, we're going to have to finish up shortly. I want to talk a little bit about the thing that just hits me the hardest in some ways, aside from just the kind of wanton violence and destruction of these attacks, is it's just a staggering intelligence failure, obviously. I mean, and I would say that on the side of, both Israel and the United States, which obviously has, significant, collection activities, both in SIGINT and human in the region. So how is it that happened? And I know you've said that that there isn't any clear picture right now, right? But it's just, it strains credulity.
Yeah, I mean, I think you and I are actually in the same boat on this. We're asking the same questions. I just don't know the answers yet. And the fact of the matter is, we know that Egypt had issued a warning that there were rumors of intended attack or attacks. We also know that even from Israeli intelligence, there were reports that they are plotting a lot of attacks. Why this particular set of events went completely through the radar, I have no idea. There's got to be somebody involved somehow who has infiltrated in some way or has betrayed their position, because I don't see any other way that at this level this could have happened. It also is entirely possible that it's a result of a cyber attack. I mean, we're dealing with cyber attacks all the time, from Russia in some cases, and also from Iran, of course. So if Iran was involved in this directly in terms of disinformation from the cybersecurity standpoint, I can also see how that could have resulted in some sort of mix-up that allowed those borders to be somewhat vulnerable. The whole country agrees with me. I mean, everyone is like, what? How did this even happen? So it's a significant blow. Absolutely.
What's your reaction to the Chinese Communist Party advocating for a two-state solution, so to speak, in reaction to what happened?
Well, I don't think a one-state, two-state, or 20-state solution has anything to do with what happened. What happened, in my view, is completely independent of any sort of peace process. First of all, Hamas isn't the body that's able to make decisions on whether or not there will be peace. Technically, it's the Palestinian Authority, and they are not in charge of the Palestinian Authority, so it's not up to them. The other thing is that, as I mentioned, these acts of terrorism have focused primarily on civilians. This is not an objective to retake land or, claim specific territory as their own. That doesn't seem to be what the goal is. The goal here is to terrorize. The goal here is to kidnap, to torture, to humiliate. So responding to this by saying there should be two states, or there should be one state, or there should be no states, has nothing to do with it. It's not related to the issue. This is coming from a perspective of someone who isn't here, doesn't understand what's happening on the ground, and is regurgitating the same rhetoric they've heard for years from someone else, because they don't actually want to, for whatever reason, they don't actually want to condemn the actual problem here. And the problem here is the Islamist terrorist organization, Hamas, with the backing and the funding and the training of the Islamic Republic of Iran.
So what are Israel's options?
I mean, right now, Israel is doing significant airstrikes in the Gaza Strip. I know that there are several hundred Palestinians who have already died. We don't know how many of them are combatants or civilians, but we do know that Israel issued warnings to entire neighborhoods in some cases to evacuate. I think as of what I last checked, there were little over 900 airstrikes that have been conducted on specific terrorist sites in Gaza, and counting. They're still very actively engaging in that. The IDF is also on the ground within the communities in the south, checking and ensuring that there are no Palestinians left, arresting them if they find them. So this is really the only option that we have right now, is to fight. After that, we need to conduct a full investigation into how this happened. But at the end of the day, I mean, Israel has to do what they have to do to protect their civilians. And this issue with Hamas has gone on for years. And the poor people in southern Israel have faced incessant rocket fire for years. Their houses are reinforced as bomb shelters. They have 15 seconds after a rocket gets fired. They have 15 seconds to get to a shelter. And this has just become a part of their daily reality. And that's unacceptable. And it doesn't matter that less people are dying on the Israeli side. Israel doesn't have an obligation to protect Palestinians. Obviously, we don't want to kill anyone. We don't want to see more people die. But when it comes to Israel defending itself or Israel not striking terrorist sites, Israel needs to strike the terrorist sites. Israel needs to deal an extremely heavy blow to this organization so that they don't come back, because that is the only deterrent. The only language that Hamas understands is force. There isn't negotiating with terrorist organizations like this. You cannot compromise with these people. It's the same problem that the West is making with Iran. You can't make an agreement with them because there is no agreement with them. They're not a legitimate body. They don't have the same aims. They're not interested in advancing the future of their people or their country. So the only solution is to fight.
Final question as we actually finish up here. I've heard, and this from numerous sources and even friends in Israel, that there had been a kind of complacency that had emerged in society. I want to get your opinion on that, but also, and that this situation might be something that actually, galvanizes or kind of reconnects these various. There's been a lot of political feuding recently, a lot of acrimonious discourse and so forth. This seems to be like a uniting event. People are saying that. So just on this complacency and how Israelis are reacting as we finish.
Well, I think since this occurred, Israel has really come together. It's true that we've been in a rather extended period of political division, both on religious secular lines and also on right-left political lines. There have been continuous protests for, we were at 42 weeks and counting, I think. There was actually a protest planned the day of this terror attack, which was canceled after the news broke in the morning. So there is a lot of political division. We have a very unpopular government with very unpopular ministers and very controversial prime minister. Everyone has their opinion about him. And it's true that in this situation, there's a lot of anger. There's a lot of anger at the government. So in a way, the people are united against the government because they're upset about how this could have happened in the first place. At the same time, we are not a society that divides itself in the middle of a war. We're a society that comes together when there's a war, regardless of differences. And generally speaking, this is what we have seen across the country, from right to left, religious, secular, Arab, Jewish. Everyone who is Israeli is in the same boat. And we all stand behind the IDF and support what they're doing, and we'll do whatever we can to support them so that they are victorious.
Well, Emily Schrader, such a pleasure to have you on, and we'll have you back again soon.
Thank you so much. It was a pleasure.